Hello, friends. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at basic sentence structure in English. So every simple sentence in English follows one of three basic sentence structures. So if you know these basic structures, then it doesn't matter how long or how complicated a sentence is. You'll be able to understand what the main parts of the sentence are and what the extra parts are, hopefully helping you to understand the sentences a little bit better. So what are the three basic structures? We have commands, which we call the imperative. We have statements, which we call the declarative. And we have questions, which we call the interrogative. So commands. The basic part of a command is the verb. Commands start with verbs. They might have other words in the sentence, but the verb is the main part. So if you don't have that, then you don't have the sentence. Statements are similar, but we add a subject to them. So we'll have a subject and we'll have a verb. We might have other parts to it, but we have to have the subject and the verb in order to make it a statement. Questions are like statements, except that we're having a helping verb before the subject. So we'll have a helping verb, a subject, and a main verb. In a few kinds of questions, we might just have the verb, then the subject. So let's dig into each of these and look at some examples. So imperative sentences. These are the commands. So imperative sentences have to have a verb. These are the most basic sentences really in any language. And these are the kinds of sentences that you'll hear adults using with children. For example, stop. Right? You can't get any more simple than that. It's one word, it's just a verb, and it's a command. Sit down. So here we have two words, but the main part of it is the verb. Here we've just added the extra particle down, but really we just mean sit. Be quiet now. Again, the main part of this is the verb be. What we've added is this extra word quiet, which is an adjective, and then we've added an adverb here. So be quiet now. This would be a complete sentence, but the main part of the sentence is the verb be. If we look at each of these, we'll notice that the verb is in the base form. It doesn't change. So in imperative sentences, the verb is going to be in the base form, which means that's the form you find in the dictionary. You don't have to change the verb at all. The verb will come first in the sentence. That's why I say these are the simplest sentences in English. And these are the ones that often get used with children, because children have to use simple language. So the second type of imperative sentence would be with a verb and an object. For example, eat your food. Again, the sentence starts with a verb, but we have an object after it. This is what we call a transitive verb. A transitive verb is a verb that has an object with it. If we look back at the first type, where it was just the verb, you'll see that these verbs don't have any object. Stop. We're not stopping something. You're stopping yourself. Sit down. So you're telling the person you're talking to sit down. There's no object to these sentences. But for the second kind, we do have an object. Eat your food, try this, or John, close the fridge. So the pattern is the same. Verb object, verb object, verb object. If you look at the last one, though, you'll see we've added this name at the beginning. John, close the fridge. So here, the name John is not actually the subject of the sentence. That's why we have the comma there. What we're doing is we're trying to clarify who we are talking to. Maybe there's more than one person in the room. So if we say John, close the fridge, that means we're talking specifically to John and not to anybody else. So we don't need to have this information in there. It's just extra information to clarify who we're talking to. And if you have children, you know you have to do this sometimes if you have more than one child. If you're telling somebody to stop, you might need to be clear who you're talking to. So you might say, Jill, stop, or John, stop. But this, in terms of the grammar, is not the subject of the sentence. Actually, with the imperative sentences, the subject is always you. So like you eat your food. But we don't say you. It's known, it's implied. So the next type of sentence is the declarative sentence. These are just basic statements. To understand declarative sentences, it's helpful to know a little bit about clauses and how clauses are organized. So a clause has two parts, a subject and a predicate. The subject is who or what the sentence is about. It's usually a noun or a noun phrase. The predicate is what the sentence is saying about the subject, which includes the verb and everything after. So we could take every simple declarative sentence in English and divide it into these two parts, the subject and the predicate. And if you can do that, it will help you a lot with trying to be clear about what the sentence is saying. So if you know what the subject is, then we know who or what we're talking about in the sentence. And then if we know what the predicate is, we know what the sentence is saying about the subject. So for example, every sentence has a subject and a predicate. Here's a sentence, right? So every sentence has a subject and a predicate. Do you see the verb in this sentence? The verb is has, which means that this information over here is the subject, because in English declarative sentences, the subject comes first. So every sentence is the subject. Has is the verb, so that means all of this is the predicate of this sentence. So I'll just put a P for predicate. So who or what are we talking about? We're talking about every sentence. What are we saying about every sentence? We're saying it has a subject and a predicate. So this information is what we're saying about every sentence. So every basic sentence in English can be divided in this way, the subject and the predicate, every simple sentence. So we've got about 6 different kinds of declarative sentences. The order is about the same. It's just what kind of information comes after the verb is different. So the first kind would be just a basic subject and a verb. For example, my son reads, animals eat, or Sarah sits. So here's the verb, here's the subject. We can divide it, which means that this is the subject, my son, and this is the predicate, reads. Animals eat. So we've got subject and we have predicate. So who are we talking about? We're talking about animals. What are we saying about animals? We're saying that they eat. Sarah sits. Who are we talking about? We're talking about Sarah. What is Sarah doing? Sarah sits. So this would be the first kind of declarative sentence. It's just a subject and a verb. And in this case, the verb doesn't have an object. It's just the verb by itself. The second kind would be subject, verb, object. For example, my son reads books. So who or what are we talking about? We're talking about my son. So here is the subject, my son. What are we saying about him? We're saying he reads books. So this part here is the predicate. The predicate here includes the verb and the object. I love coffee. Again, divide it between the subject and the verb. So the subject is I. What are we saying about I? That I love coffee. So there's my predicate. My daughter played a game. What's the subject? The subject is my daughter. And what are we saying about her? We're saying that she played a game. There's my predicate. So it's pretty simple to just divide the sentence into 2 parts. So the predicate could just have the verb, or the predicate could have the verb and an object. The third type of sentence, declarative sentence, would be subject, verb, adjective. For example, she is pretty, winters are cold, coffee tastes delicious. Now, the order of the words is very similar to the other ones we just looked at. We have the subject, we have the verb, but then in these ones we have an adjective. If you know what an adjective is, you know that an adjective describes a noun. So if we look back at these sentences, the subject is doing some action, like reading, and they're reading the books. So the action is happening from the subject to the object. So my son reads books. The action is happening that way. I love coffee. The action is happening that way. If we look at the subject, verb, adjective ones, there's no action that is happening. She is pretty, winters are cold, coffee tastes delicious. There's no action. What we're doing is we're using a different kind of verb, which we call a linking verb. What happens in these sentences is the adjective after the verb is actually describing the subject. So the organization is the same. We have the subject and the verb, but then after the verb, because we have an adjective, that means that this sentence is describing the subject. But we still have a subject and we have a predicate. In this case, the predicate is just describing the subject. So winters are cold. Cold is describing the winters. Coffee tastes delicious. Delicious describes the coffee. The fourth type here is subject, verb, noun. And this kind of noun we call a complement. Here, complement means to complete something, to complete it. So for example, I am a teacher, I used to be a student, or that is my wife. Again, we have the subject and the predicate. The predicate starts with the verb and includes that noun complement. But these ones are like the last ones, the subject, verb, adjective, because the complement is describing the subject. So I am a teacher. Teacher is describing I. I used to be a student. Student is describing I in the past. That is my wife. My wife is describing who that is. So again, these ones are describing sentences. But you'll see the basic organization is, I forgot the C. There we go. Describing. The basic organization is the same. We have a subject and we have a predicate. It's just that the information in the predicate is different than subject, verb, object, but the order of the words is the same. The fourth kind would be subject, verb, adverb, like she talks quietly, she runs fast, or people are everywhere. So these ones are kind of like the previous two kinds, except that whereas I am a teacher describes the subject, verb, adverb, the adverb describes the action, not the subject. But again, we have the subject and the predicate. Except that here the predicate is describing the action. The sixth kind that we're going to look at here are subject, verb, prepositional phrase. For example, I am in my office, she works at Home Depot, or my appointment is on the 10th of January. So a prepositional phrase is a phrase that starts with a preposition and then has a noun or a noun phrase after it. So here in is my preposition. And my office, this is a noun phrase. So this is the prepositional phrase here, in my office. You'll see that it's telling me the location of I, or she works at Home Depot. It's telling me where she works. So these sentences, the subject, verb, prepositional phrase, are quite like the subject, verb, adverb sentences. in that they're describing where, when, why, or how the action is happening. But still, they are divided into the subject and the predicate. So we've got the subject, we've got the verb, and then we have whatever is after the verb. Subject, verb, predicate, subject, verb, predicate. And again, the predicate starts with the verb and includes everything after it. So this last kind of sentence we're going to look at is called the interrogative. And the interrogative is just a question. We've got two basic types of interrogative sentences in English: yes/no questions and information questions. So yes/no questions. The order of the words in a yes/no question are either verb subject or helping verb subject main verb. So the verb subject ones are when the verb is a form of the be verb. So that could be am, is, are, was, or were. If that is the main verb, then you'll have that verb first and then the subject. And that'll make it a question. Because normally in an English sentence, if it's a statement, the subject would come first. In English, we make something into a question by putting a verb before the subject, or a helping verb before the subject. So if it's a form of the be verb as the main verb, then it'll come before the subject. Or if it's any other verb, then we'll have a helping verb, the subject, and then the main verb. So for example, are you married? So here are is a form of the be verb. And you is the subject. And then married is just an adjective describing you. Now, if we were answering this, we would say, I am married. So you see, in the question, the verb is coming first. In the statement, the subject is coming first. And that's the difference between a question and a statement, is the order of the words in the sentence. Or do you have children? So here my main verb is have, so my question has to start with a helping verb, do. And do is the helping verb we use in the present simple. So do you have children? So are you married? The answer is either going to be yes or no, most of the time. I had one person one time said, well, they could be yes or no or maybe or I'm not sure. Yeah, that's true. But most of the time your answer is going to be yes or no. The other kind of question is an information question. And these are the ones that start with a WH word. Who, what, when, where, why, or how. For example, what is your name? So here we've got the WH word because the main verb is a form of the be verb. We've just got the WH word, we have their verb, and then we have our subject. Where do you work? Because the main verb is work, then we have a helping verb instead before the subject. So where, the WH word, helping verb do, subject you, and main verb work. So if I ask you what is your name, then your answer is going to be some kind of information. It'll be your actual name. If I say where do you work, then your answer is going to be information about the place where you work. If I say why do you work there, then your answer is going to be information about the reason why you work there. It's not going to be yes or no. So this is one way you can easily tell if somebody's question is asking you for information or if they just need a yes or a no. If the question starts with a verb or a helping verb, then it's a yes/no answer. If it starts with a WH word, then it's asking for some kind of information. So that's it for this presentation. These are some of the basic sentence structures in English. I hope it's helpful the next time you're trying to read or listen in English for understanding how things are organized. Thanks for watching.